Okay. Scott, Ed, take it away with an introduction.
Okay, well, I didn't have any chance to prepare, but Scott is a wonderful presenter and plant explorer par excellence. This is our second time hearing from him. He did a wonderful presentation on gingers that we saw, I guess, sometime within the last year. I don't think it's been a year ago. And it was a fascinating presentation, very exciting to see all the work that he was doing in Vietnam related to gingers. And we got a brief glimpse of his testing with these plants. And it was really very exciting to see, because this is all new stuff coming from places, and it does have the potential for horticulture and including in our area, although where he is slightly warmer than we are here. So and so without further ado, I would pass it over to Scott.
Very good. Thank you very much, Ed. I appreciate that. And it is a pleasure to be back here with you guys again. For those, I'm not sure who was here the first time or not, so I'll just give a kind of a brief background of what I do for ABG, and then kind of we'll get into it this evening. So my name is Scott McMahan. I manage the International Plant Exploration Program at the Atlanta Botanical Garden. I started working for the Botanical Garden actually in 1999.
Let me go mute here. Okay, I'm having a trouble hearing. Is anyone else having that problem?
He's muted.
Scott,
Oh, I see.
Can you unmute
Yeah,
yourself,
we lost
please?
him.
Scott, can you please unmute yourself?
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, not sure what happened there. Let's see. So in any case, I started working for the Botanical Garden, like I said, in about 1999. I made my first trip to China in 2001. And since then, have made close to 40 trips to Southeast Asia. We're focusing mostly on China, India, and Vietnam. Traveled to China the first probably 15 years of my career, and since COVID and the somewhat closing of the border there, we've kind of refocused our efforts in northern Vietnam and Northeast India, actually here quite recently. So I've been doing this for 20 plus years now, and typically I speak about the actual field work that we do and photographs from the field. But this time I've created a lecture that will focus on kind of the woody plant successes that we've had over the years in our trial gardens at ABG. And so we'll talk a little bit about that this evening. Sorry. So like I said, I'm kind of a one-trick pony when it comes to lectures, and typically I do speak on our field work. So I will talk a little bit about that in the introduction here. We've started working about 2015 or so in Northeast India, in the states of Assam and Arunachal Pradesh that border Myanmar and China, Tibet there. And what you're looking at are the Mishmi Hills of Arunachal Pradesh. You may know them as hump. In World War II, this mountain range was referred to. This is the eastern part of the Himalayas that separates kind of Northeast India from China. And so during World War II, U.S. and British troops who were stationed in Northeast India would fly regularly cargo airplanes over what they called the hump, or the Himalayas, and land in Kunming, China. However, 600 airplanes crashed in these areas during World War II, and it's extremely remote. And to this day, only about 25 of those planes have been recovered. The mountains that you see there before you go on for hundreds and hundreds of miles, and then finally go into actual the Chinese border there. But they are vastly unexplored. Back about 110 years ago, when the British were in control of this part of India, Frank Kingdon Ward spent his career studying the plants and both the flora and the fauna of this part of India. But since then, really, there have been a very large kind of disconnect in the exploration of this part of the world. It's extremely remote, and in this area there are about 13 people per square mile. So the population is quite low, and because of that, the flora has remained basically intact. You can also probably notice that these mountains are forested all the way to the top. So the alpine area still contains both broadleaf evergreen and coniferous forests. So they're extremely rich and diverse in these areas. And so we're really excited to continue to work there in the coming years. We could not sort of thing without our local. Not only do we work with the local Academy of Science, in this case, this photograph is of some of the PhDs who we work with from the Vietnam Academy of Science and Technology, as well as local porters who really are subsistence farmers that live up in these hills and know kind of the pig trails, if you will, of getting back into these mountains. And so employing these guys to help get us into this part of the world really is they're imperative. Without them, we just couldn't do it. But we also, what we bring to the table basically is an opportunity for these to the field. Without us there, we are about a 10-hour drive away, so they do not have the funds necessarily to travel from their offices in Hanoi up to the Northeast and spend 2 or 3 weeks in the field. So while field work, we take as many of the PhDs out of the office as we possibly can, as well as getting some of the younger students and researchers with us, and of course employ some of the porters to help carry the gear to sustain us for 5, 6, 7 days out in the field. This is a shot of probably one of our oldest colleagues in Vietnam. This is Dr. Zhu, who I've been working with since 2000. Our main goal with working with these researchers is to document and collect the plant material that is in these areas. And what he's holding here is a new species of rhododendron that we described about 8 years ago. And so we are, that's part of the main goals of what we do in these.
We know the woods.
Uh-oh.
Well, I'll take us out of there.
Jim, could you mute your audio?
I'm trying to.
Okay, great. Thanks.
There. So we work with these guys to document not only new species in these areas, but the companion plants that grow in these areas as well. So we've been working with them for many years now, and our relationship has grown to the point where we exchange plant material. We've just finished this past August. We had Dr. Zhu and another one of his colleagues here in Atlanta for 3 weeks working with us at both of our locations here at the Atlanta Botanical Garden in Midtown, as well as in Gainesville, teaching such things as propagation protocols, how to properly store seed long term, collecting seed, propagating cuttings, things like this. It's really the practical horticulture is what we bring to the table when we kind of create these relationships, which is something that we take for granted coming from where we are coming from, being gardeners and somewhat educated horticulturists. While our colleagues in these areas are PhDs and educated scientists, the practicality of horticulture is completely lost in most of these countries. So they are fantastic at describing plants and identifying plants, but when it comes to even knowing what time of year to collect seed or how to sow the seed or the aftercare of germinated seedlings is really not any part of the curriculum over there. So that's what we really are able to bring to the table when we work with these guys and begin to collaborate and kind of share knowledge on how to further make them successful with the endangered plants they're working with. So we document not only new species, but we also look for, really champion old growth trees as well. So this past spring, you're looking at my colleague Paul Blackmore, who manages our Tropical Rotunda Conservatory here at the Atlanta Botanical Garden, and he's to a Huadendron tibeticum. This is a plant that's in Styracaceae. It's an evergreen relative in Styracaceae. Beautiful plant that sheds its bark every year. The trunk becomes quite smooth, as you can see here, but the tree is quite slow growing. So we estimate this tree to be between 80 and 100 years old. And while it certainly is not the oldest tree in this jungle, to see this particular specimen of this size was really fantastic. The data that comes with these plant collections really is what sets the plants that we bring back apart from actual botanical garden specimens, from plants that you can buy in your local nursery. Many of the plant material that we collect are species that have been described but just have never been introduced. And so what we're looking, the highest known provenance of many of these plants, for example, the broadleaf evergreens that we work with, many of them occur almost at sea level, which would contain almost no hardiness for us here in the Southeast or the East Coast. So we look to find things like Scheffalera, evergreen magnolias, acubas, evergreen hydrangeas. We look to find them at the highest elevation we possibly can, with hopes that they will have some innate cold hardiness to them, even though their counterparts may not have so much. The hedychiums, for example, that I spoke to your group, the gingers, hardy gingers that I spoke on last time, we found tremendous hardiness in some of these plants based basically on the provenance where they came from, because we do try to do our very best in collecting these plants at high elevation. So where you're looking at here is our team from about 1 year ago in northern Vietnam. Each bag basically contains cuttings or a small plant of all different collections. All the bags are numbered with names and collection numbers. We have Mark Wethington here sitting from the J.C. Ralston Arboretum taking data for us. And then Dan Hinckley is in the background there, who was also with us last fall. And then Tim Marchlick in the foreground in the red shirt was helping number everything. So all of this has to be put together in a spreadsheet, not only for our own knowledge, but also when we import all these plants, they're inspected not only in the country of origin, but then the USDA will go through each bag fairly meticulously, looking for any bugs or pathogens that could be on there, because we certainly don't want to introduce anything like that. Just a shot of where we typically work. The accommodations we have are certainly not the Ritz-Carlton when we're working out in these areas. We do have the luxury of staying at an old cardamom camp here. So this was a shed basically that we stayed in for 5 days. This again is in northern Vietnam, and from this point we could kind of wagon wheel out in all different directions each day, going and spending a full day going in a different direction and making collections, kind of based upon elevation and what side of the mountain they were on. So what you're seeing here is at the end of the day really is when our work begins. Up when the sun rises, get our gear together, have breakfast, and then go out to collect seed or plants, bring them back in the evenings is really when the work starts. And so what Tim and Paul here are doing are kind of laying all of the bags out in chronological order, making notes for the day, because we forget. We collect this particular trip, we collected over 500 plant specimens. And so trying to do this 3-4 days out becomes almost impossible. It kind of bleeds together. So these days are quite long, but extremely rewarding. And to sit back and kind of number all the really unique plants and germplasm that you collected during the day is a fun thing to do while sitting around the fire with your libation of choice and kind of telling tales of the day. So it's a great thing. So not only do we work in the field, but in order to get out into the fields, it's important to make these collaborations. This is myself in the center there, of course, surrounded by the director of the Botanical Survey of India and his top researchers. This photo was taken about a year ago. And then just last month, I was back in India and we signed a memorandum of understanding with the Indian government. The Atlanta Botanical Garden actually is the first NGO to sign a memorandum of understanding with the Indian government concerning the study of forest ecology and climate change. So we're very proud of that accomplishment. It took about 2 years. I was in India 5 times in 2 years, meetings and coming up with this MOU and going with the parameters of this MOU. And so we'll do very much the same thing in India that we've been doing in Vietnam, which is setting up a visiting scholar exchange. Once a year, we will host a pair of their researchers to come to Atlanta and again learn the practicalities of horticulture, just like we've done with our Vietnamese researchers, and then continue to do field research all over India, but in particular in the northeastern areas where it has really been kind of underexplored. So the gist of my talk tonight is not really about all of that. What it is about is the successes that we've had over the years. Now, you know, in the past 22 or 23 years of doing this, we've had some extreme failures. We've had plants that have tended to like where they were here in the Southeast a little too much. And we've had, you know, plants that seem like they will really play nicely here in the Southeast. So we've been taking notes, evaluating, eradicating plants as we feel the need. And so the Atlanta Botanical Garden has two locations. Our main garden, that is 50 years old this year, is in Midtown Atlanta. And our satellite location, which was opened about 8 years ago now, is in Gainesville, Georgia, which is about an hour or so northeast of Atlanta, where we have about 200 acres. Our garden in the city is about 30 acres, and really, in order to plant a tree, we almost have to take something out at this point. It is so full of buildings and pathways and garden beds. But our garden in Gainesville not only we have a small display garden there, but about 150 acres of woods, and then several sections of fields for research and development. We have about 11 acres fenced in. We have a pretty strong deer presence up on this piece of property. So we have an 11-acre fenced in area that keeps the deer out, that allows us to do this sort of field growing and evaluation of these plants. And so what you're looking at, we are able to grow basically in an orchard style, full sun area. But our field, you can see, is in the middle of a deciduous forest. So in the middle of the field, of course, would be full sun. But on the edges of the forest, we can plant plants depending on their needs, with morning sun, afternoon shade, or the opposite of that. We also, the field that you're looking at is the center of a mound. And so as it to the left, it drops down to a dry creek bed, where we get basically a shaded woodland sort of effect for all the plants that we are evaluating that do need, shade to filtered sunlight. So the idea is to grow these plants to a specimen size before we then tree spade them out and put them on display either at the Atlanta Botanical Garden Gainesville or down in Midtown. That is if they basically make the cut. You know, if plants are in this area, we germinate most of the plants that come in here from seed, which takes place, of course, in our greenhouse. And then after they're about 2 years old, we move them out of the nursery setting and put them into the field as soon as we possibly can. We get off these plants, but the idea with this field really was to get a specimen size display plant. And then once we dig it and once it goes on display, it is, it looks like something. It doesn't look like a 1-gallon plant. We didn't want to use this field to make selections and then begin propagating off that plant and kind of start from zero. So once a plant shows merit, we begin taking cuttings on it selectively, but we always kind of leave the basic shape and stature of the tree to be transplanted and then put on display. We have had plants, as I mentioned. We run through our plants with a criteria known as PRE, which is Plant Risk Evaluator. This was developed by the University of California, Berkeley, which is a 19 yes or no question list that basically helps to predict the invasive potential of plants that are not native. So we run our plants through that protocol, and we have certainly eradicated over the years. My program started in 2016, and I would say we have completely eradicated out of this field about 8 to 10 of our collections that have proven to be just they reseed too quickly. We see seed popping up in various parts of the nursery that makes us leery, or something else with that plant. It's prone to disease. Something like this allows us to kind of evaluate it and eradicate it at this point. So we do our very best before we let these things go to make sure that they're not going to be problematic in the future. Just a shot of the tree spade. Everything is laid out so we can get in and spade these trees out and then move them as needed. You can kind of get an idea as to what size plant we then put out in our garden. So the rest of the time, I would like to spend kind of talking about actual plants that we feel like have great merit. And so what you will notice, as I mentioned, this talk has kind of a woody theme to it. In trying to decide how to lay them out between sun and shade, or families, or genus, or I just basically decided to go A to Z. That seemed to be the best way to do it, was to do it in alphabetical order. Hopefully you received the slide list. But what I did not have time to do was go back and label each one of these pictures, but I did send a slide list out this afternoon or earlier today that hopefully you guys have gotten, so you can follow along as we go, and if you have any questions. This is a fantastic maple, one of a handful of woody plants that we have been successful at growing from northern Vietnam. What we found with the woodies from northern Vietnam is that they are very susceptible to our late winter fluctuations in temperature. You guys may have a similar issue. In February, we may get up to 70 degrees for 3 or 4 days, and then we drop back down to the low 20s for a week, and then we can do like that all winter long. And some of these plants that occur on the borderline of kind of temperate tropical areas, they don't take much cold or chilling requirements before they start to leaf out, or before the sap starts flowing and they start to try to grow. And then when we dip back down to 20 degrees again, we have just explosion of the bark, or just outright death of many of these plants. However, some of these maples that we have collected, and a handful of the plants from Vietnam that are collected at proper elevation, we've had really good luck. As I mentioned, one of our Acer David eyes that just had fantastic fall color that has done really well for us. Beautiful kind of a orangey yellow, very leathery leaf. Fantastic collection. This is Acer heptaphlebum. So this was a new one for me. I think in 2017, we found this tree growing again in the mountains of northern Vietnam in an area called Fancy Pan. The older mature foliage, as you can see, turned just kind of a matte green. The new growth is this beautiful kind of maroon red, but the undersides of the oldest leaves stay this kind of a really deep purple. It is an absolutely beautiful maple that grows to about 20 feet high, 10 to 15 feet wide. But as the wind blows and those leaves kind of tremble in the wind, to see that black purple underside is just really fantastic. So this plant has a flower. If you're familiar with Acer sycamensis or some of the other Himalayan maples, it has a long chain, a long inflorescence of samaras, and so it actually is one of the maples that has ornamental blooms to it as well. It is deciduous, which is good. I think many of the evergreen maples do not do so well for us. So the fact that it is deciduous, I think, increases its hardiness pretty greatly, and is a fantastic plant to try. Now, as I mentioned, we kind of use our field to evaluate these plants, but we also look for differences in seedlings that we have. So, I'm sure every seed is like a child. Everyone, even if it comes from the same mother plant, each one can have a little different characteristic to it. And so, in this case, this is Aesculus AF wilsonii. And so on the sheet there, when I use AF, that means affinity 2. So that is our best guess for the species. We know it's an Aesculus, we know it's a buckeye, but the species still has eluded us because these have not flowered yet, which really is the best time to key them out. So, but what we loved about this one was the dark new growth. really this stays until the heat of the summer, when the plant then sort of greens up. But this is a shot in mid-June, well, I guess early June, as the trees are starting to really leaf out there. But the spring color on this is fantastic, and then the fall color is equally dramatic, being a really dark red, which is pretty unusual for Aesculus in our area. Usually they kind of have a paper bag brown to them by the end of the summer, but this has turned out to be a fantastic seedling of Aesculus wilsoni. Now, this is not a great photo, but I wanted to emphasize the height of this particular plant. So this is Acuba. This is a species of Acuba called Irabatrifolia. So the foliage gets like that of a loquat. Irabatria is the genus of loquat. So Acuba Irabatrifolia would indicate that the leaves of this are quite large. And so here we go. I can use my pointer now. So you can see maybe the red clusters of fruit here. This tree is about 40 feet tall. I have seen this only one time. This particular day, we ran across this tree in northern Vietnam, and were able to collect really great seed of this plant. Large inflorescence. With my camera, of course, I was able to take these telephoto shots. We had to employ a local farmer to climb up this tree and then finally chop down one of the branches in order for us to get the seed. It was too high for any of our actual grabbers to get any of the seed, but we were able to get a handful of these things and now have them going. The foliage is as thick as plastic, and the edges, as you can see, are quite serrated and they are almost spiny. This tree, this picture was actually taken about 6 months ago, and it now is about 6 feet tall. So we're really excited to have these. We have 3 seedlings. Acubas are plants, male and female plants. Our flowers are on different plants, and so we're hoping that we have potentially one of each sex there, but we really don't know. So we're pretty excited to have this guy going. The foliage on this can get about 2 feet long. This is a Raeliid that I just love called Brassioopsis. Now, a few of the plants that I will show, I should have prefaced this earlier, but a handful of these are sensitive to cold, but they're so fantastic that we use them as container plants and then bring them into the greenhouse in the wintertime. But I know you guys are a little colder than we are, but I did want to include some of these because I think the foliage of them is just so fantastic and dramatic. It is worth a little bit of effort to plant these or put them in a large pot and then wheel them in and out if you're able to. They don't take much, they don't need much protection. But that last winter we got down to 5 degrees on Christmas Eve, and that really clobbered some things. And I know you guys probably get that cold regularly, but that was something that we had not seen in a very long time. But this particular plant, Brassioopsis, we're not really sure of the species of this. It is a spiny sucker. It's in the Raeliid family, but the foliage is just absolutely fantastic on this. So we use this as centerpieces in some of our containers. It really prefers shade. The foliage can get 2 feet across, and just really magnificent tropical looking foliage on a semi-hardy plant. We've lost the foliage on it before in the wintertime where the buds are fine, the vegetative part is fine, but it does not like to be down in the single digits outside, that's for sure. Carpinus is one of my very favorite genus of woody trees, and we have about in 2014, when we were working in China, we happened upon several mountain ranges that had 4 or 5 different species of Carpinus. And this particular one, which we really don't know the species of this, so I've just got SP down there on the slide list, but it has magnificent. This is in the spring, so the new growth comes out this almost chocolatey purple, and then you can see there's 2 different species here side by side. So this foliage is a little bit smaller and stays purple for quite a long time on the left-hand side of your screen. On the right-hand side of your screen, The foliage comes out red purple all summer long. The old foliage stays nice and green, so it almost looks like it's blooming from a distance. Just fantastic, really beautiful, kind of small trees. These now, we've had these, I think, like I said, I think we collected these in 2015, and so they are about 10 feet tall, 8 feet wide. Beautiful muscular trunk on these, nice fall color, but beautiful clean foliage. I just love these Carpinus and have great hardiness. A cephalotaxis that we don't often see is this really nice one called Oliverii. Has beautiful white stomatal bands on the back. The foliage is just as soft as it can be. Its only drawback is it's extremely slow growing. So this is an upright type of cephalotaxis. The plant you're looking at there is about 3 feet tall, and it is about 6 years old from seed. So it does grow slowly, but it is worth the wait. Just beautiful, as I mentioned, stomatal bands there, and a great species of cephalotaxis to grow if you can find it. I did throw this in. This clematis is an evergreen clematis that is probably the most impressive vine that we have ever collected. This is from China. This is around early July. And so we finally figured out this is called Clematis venetiana. And so this is growing on the front of my house here. This is one plant planted here at the base of the gutter that has grown up. And what you're looking at, these flower spikes occur in the axils of the leaf. And the flowers themselves are quite small, but the panicles they produce can be 2.5 feet long, each one, and they will occur in the axils of this foliage, and is just absolutely amazing when it's in full bloom. And then it is in, I would say, half-day sun, and by the end of the day, when the sun has heated these flowers up, our entire yard just has this really light perfume. It has been a fantastic plant for us, and not only does it have these really nice flower displays and very clean evergreen foliage, the new growth is a very shiny, leathery purple. It's absolutely excellent. There is a clematis grower in Athens called Brushwood Nursery, who specializes in clematis, and he has made his bread and butter on Clematis ormondii and has completely stopped selling it and replaced it with this particular one. It has been a really great plant for us. It's started to be seen more and more out in the marketplace. Coreopsis are another one of my absolute favorites. This is one that we collected in China, I believe in 2016. It can have 3 to 5 flower spikes per node, and is really nicely fragrant. Not only does it have this beautiful kind of floristic display, also has large kind of powder blue pleated foliage, prefers part sun, part shade, doesn't really like to be in extremes of either one of those, as we found. This does well kind of in half-day sun, half-day, but is a remarkable plant. Same sort of a growing habit as like a Coreopsis spicata, so it's pretty big. You know, this plant's going to get 10 to 12 feet high and wide, arching, caning sort of a habit to it. But in flower, it is remarkable, and then even the foliage is really fantastic and has decent fall color too, I'd say. As far as woody plants go, this has probably been one of our most well-received and most ornamental introductions. This was a collection we made in 2014 in Hubei, China, I believe. This is called Cercis chuniana. And so you're looking at it in full bloom here. It is one of 2 species of red buds that produce racemes of flowers. Cercis racemosa is one that perhaps you're familiar with, that is the most commonly produced plant that produces these sorts of flower chains. But Cercis chuniana was one that apparently had not been introduced to the United States. We collected this on the roadside in Hubei, and had, I think, 3 or 4 seeds germinate only. And from that, we did not know, we had no idea what species of was. We just knew that it was a red bud. But once it started to flower about 4 or 5 years ago, we were able to key it out, and then ultimately figured out that it really was quite rare in cultivation, and also have been passing this one around. So it has this amazing flower display in the early spring, and then it is the only red bud I know of that has some of the most dramatic fall color I've ever seen. And what you may notice also on this leaf is the leaf is oblique, and so it's not a perfect mirror of itself down the middle of the plant. This also threw us off as to what this plant was when we first saw it. The leaf shape is just off, but the foliage is thick and leathery, which indicates that it can take full sun, hot conditions, which it absolutely has been able to in our North Georgia trials. That's not to say that it doesn't prefer a little bit of afternoon shade, especially, in our 90+ degree summers in August, but still the foliage remains and the fall color is just as fantastic as it can be. This is a really wonderful multi-season introduction, I think, and as I mentioned, probably one of our most ornamental woody plants. Daphne-phyllum, I'm sure you're growing. Macropodum has been passed around for many years. Humile has been passed around, a more dwarf clone of this. And then we got in a couple of years ago into a forest in China that had species that really look like neither one of those. The petioles are very nicely purple. The leaves are long and slender, but there are multiple species to choose from here, but none of these have flowered yet. So we're really not sure which ones these are, but we don't feel like they fall into either one of those categories. When 5 degrees came on Christmas Eve last year, these were completely unblemished. Unlike our Daphne-phyllum humiles, which were made almost completely deciduous. Macropodums lost a good bit of wood. These just set as if nothing happened at all. So the 5 degrees was a difficult pill to swallow, but it really was amazing to see the plants that came through versus the ones that didn't. And it was a real learning experience there. Fatsia, of course, you all know, but do you grow Fatsia polycarpa? This is the hardiest form, the hardiest species of Fatsia, supposedly. And I can tell you that at 5 degrees, it also was a lot less hurt than Fatsia japonica. It did lose some foliage, but it lost no vegetative wood. Blooms a little bit later, at least for us here in the Southeast, than Fatsia japonica. The main difference is the size on this plant. As you can tell, the foliage is a little bit more deeply incised than Fatsia japonica. The petioles can be up to 3 feet long in a mature plant. And in Taiwan, we saw these at easily 20 by 20. They were massive broadleaf evergreens. They are fairly slow growing. It may take 60, 70 years for it to get that size. We have plants in our evaluation field that are about 8 feet tall, and those were collected in 2012. So they're not going to win any real growth races. But even on this particular plant, this was taken in our woodlands. You can see how long this petiole is compared to the size of the leaf. The leaf is about 2 feet across. So these petioles are approaching, 4 feet anyway. So very impressive plant, good cold hardiness, and a bit of a different twist to the normal Fatsia that you may see. Hydrangeas are another one of our kind of focuses when collecting plants. Magnolias and hydrangeas are 2 of the top genus that we look for. And again, this cold spell that we had last winter really realigned our preferences for which hydrangeas we select in the garden now. Our macrophyllas and serratas were almost taken to the ground, and certainly none of them flowered until later in the season, if at all, because they bloom on old wood. The arborescens and our native ones also got, but they continue to flower because of their ability to bloom on new wood. Now, this hydrangea that we call Aph umbellata, we collected again in southeastern China, did not lose any wood. It does go completely deciduous. It did not lose any wood at all and flowered the most heavily of any of the hydrangeas in our garden, in Gainesville even, where it got to 3 degrees. So we were really pleasantly surprised by this. And the flowers are quite large. I had never really come across hydrangeas that have a scent to them, and I will not call this fragrant. It is more stinky than anything really. The fertile flowers have a pungency to them that does not last terribly long, but it is not great. I will not lie to you, but the flower color is intense. And so what you'll first notice probably is these fertile flowers are almost yellow. And so what you're looking at here on both sides of your screen are 2 different seedlings. We have 5 seedlings of this that we're looking at, and each one is slightly different. The one on the left-hand side, the flowers smaller, but the fertile flowers are incredibly showy. But it's the fertile flowers that produce that stench, unfortunately. To the right-hand side, you see blooms that are almost 3 times the size. The fertile flowers are also a little bit less yellow equals smell, unfortunately. But for cold hardiness and for colder zones, I think this plant not only could but we since last winter have been sharing this with people like Tom Rainey, who are doing some hybridization in hydrangeas to potentially increase cold hardiness in some of those. So we were really, really excited by that one. And then these next couple are just SPs. They're unknown species, even though they're blooming. The world of species hydrangeas is a muddy mess, and it is almost impossible body who can tell us exactly what these are. And China has such an amazing diversity of plants. And this continually flowers all summer long, but we have no idea what this is. No one can tell us what it is. It gets a small leaf spot on it. So by the end of the summer, it is defoliated and still blooming. So, as a nursery plant, that is not a great attribute, but the fact that it is remontant is pretty impressive, I think. So again, we're sharing this with other plant breeders. We're not breeders. We are germplasm collectors, and so we do share with other plant breeders and gardens who do that sort of thing. And this is the kind of plant that they are interested in. This is another one that we do not know what this plant is. It's hydrangea, but we don't know what species. The foliage on this can get 2 feet long, about almost 12 inches across. And you can see here this bloom, the flowers begin 2 or 3 nodes before the terminal bud. And so it makes this huge panicle, almost like a oak leaf hydrangea sort of a flower. And you can see the size of the bloom compared to the butterfly. Really, really showy plant. And these also lost no wood at 3 degrees up in Gainesville. So we're pretty pleased with these unknown hydrangea species. Let's see. Next we have Litzia auriculata. So the Lauraceous family is very well represented in Southeast US as well as Southeast Asia. But I had never in my life come across a tree form of this particular plant. It is called auriculata because of these little ears at the base of the foliage here. They auriculate leaf margin. The foliage is very reminiscent of magnolia, really. The size is about there. The fall color, as you can see on the right-hand side, is this beautiful butter yellow. These trees, we collected this down in the southeastern corner of China in Zhejiang province, which is really almost a tropical location. But this plant now is almost 15 feet tall, deciduous tree. It ultimately will be about 80 feet tall with smooth bark like a Stewardia. And the trees we saw in the forest did look like Stewardia monodelpha. Beautiful patchwork coming off the bark, very large trees. And so I was with Mark Wethington, Ralston Arboretum, when we collected this. There was no seed available. We pulled 2 small germinated seedlings. And so he has one and we have one. And as far as I know, those are the only 2 plants in the country. We've had 0 luck propagating this via cuttings. It will not root. So we're hoping that once it flowers, we can get Mark's plant and our plant together and get some seed produced, because this plant really does need to be put into the nursery trade, as it is really remarkable Litzia. This is what used to be called Manglesia moto, and once Magnolia was reclassified, and now it's called Magnolia quintongensis. It is a mouthful, but it is a beautiful, beautiful magnolia. So it's one of the few pendant flowered magnolias. The flower actually hangs down and opens up. It's a decent sized bloom. It is spectacular in flower. This is a plant at Dick Figler's house in Seneca, South Carolina, who is the magnolia guru. Some of you may know his name. But what is unusual about this plant is again the pendant flowers, but we don't have anything that will pollinate a pendant flowered magnolia in this country. So the insect that pollinates this only occurs in China, apparently. And so these blooms, in order to produce seed, have to be hand pollinated, which he does regularly. And we've begun to grow these and pass them around. The evergreen magnolias are the general rule of thumb is they are extremely difficult to root from cuttings. So growing them from seed has become one of the most practical ways to get them passed around. And this, again, is one of the most ornamental of the evergreens. It blooms at a young age, which is not always the case with some of these larger evergreen magnolias. And the pendant flowers are produced by the hundreds on a plant that is 10 years old or so. Really, really showy, fantastic magnolia. And so this is an extremely rare plant that is on the IUCN Red List. It is critically endangered. This is Magnolia guangdongensis. So when I was in China, one of our partners is Shanghai Botanic Garden, and this particular plant, the photograph is taken at their garden. But I was also taken to the only wild note of this in Guangdong province in southeastern China. It does not produce seed readily. It is virtually impossible to propagate via cuttings. And so the plant that has been selected out of the wild is the one you see here. It has the most dramatic endomentum, not only on the underside of the foliage, but also on the flower buds, which are created in the leaf axils. So it's a Michelia type magnolia, if you will. And the flowers are really quite large and also very nicely fragrant with a little bit of pink blush at the base. This is one blooming in our greenhouse. There are, I think, 3 plants in the US right now. I was able to bring in signwood of this in 2018. And so again, Dick Figler in South Carolina was sent signwood. The National Arboretum was sent signwood, and Dick was the only person that was able to actually get the grass to take. So the National Arboretum has one, I believe. Dick has one, and we have one at ABG. And so to get some seed set on these plants. It is a slow growing plant that we're not, if it is going to be long for this world. In the wild, it is almost extinct. Desire not to propagate itself, really. It just will not produce seed readily. So we'll see what happens with this, but it is an ornamental plant nonetheless, and we're hoping to get some further work done with it. This is a magnolia that I don't understand why isn't in every garden. This is Magnolia cynostellata. This is one of the most showy magnolias. It has a beautiful habit. This picture was taken at the Bartlett Tree Laboratory. Bartlett arborists, their international headquarters in Charlotte, North Carolina. They have the largest collection of magnolias in the United States. And this is one of the specimens that is there. This picture was taken, I'm going to say, about 6 years ago when the plant was in full flower, but again, never been pruned. And then this is a photograph of it just this past spring when I was going up through there to take cuttings. This is my colleague, Tim Marchlick, who is about 6 feet tall. And so you can see this looks just like a gigantic Hershey's Kiss. It is the most beautiful magnolia. Every cutting you stick roots, but I don't know why it is not in the nursery trade at all. And it's not hardly in any gardens. It really is a magnolia that should be sought after. And the flower is just beautiful. It's almost chrysanthemum-like, very much, it's reminiscent of stellata, certainly, but the growth habit is just such that it stays very tight, beautiful bloom, wonderful magnolia to look for. This is one of the hybrids that we're evaluating that was done by Bill Smith many years ago. This is Magnolia insignis times Magnolia uinensis. The holy grail of magnolias is to get a pink or red flowered flower on an evergreen plant. And many people have tried to do this. I think this is one that just about reaches, that particular goal. This is at my home in Atlanta. It does have the nice pink flowers that Magnolia insignis brings to it, with the long, narrow foliage of Magnolia uinensis, terminal blooms. So it is quite showy. It doesn't bloom kind of in the interior plant. It blooms on the terminal parts there. So it is showy. My plant is probably 40 feet tall in about 12 years. So it is a growing machine in full sun, full to the ground. And again, the 5 degrees just did absolutely nothing to this plant. So I was really impressed with it. This is a hybrid done by Kevin Paris, who did Magnolia K. Paris, you may be familiar with. He is a magnolia breeder, again, in South Carolina. This is Magnolia insignis, one of the same parents we saw in the last photo, but the other parent is Magnolia seboldii. So it also has terminal flowers, but the blooms open all the way up, as you can see, and the color is just saturated all the way through. There are multiple multiple hybrids similar to this on the market. The same parents are used. But again, every seedling is different. And this, to me, is the best plant that I have seen of this particular cross. This is the full plant at University of Georgia's Port Farm at their evaluation fields there in full sun, poor clay soil that's slightly emitted when planted, but beautiful leathery foliage, unblemished. And this is in July. The thing starts to flower in July. So I think this is definitely worthy of introduction, and is still kind of in the evaluation phase, but I think probably will be on the market before too terribly long. Meliodendron xylocarpum. It's a mouthful, but again, a plant that is out there. This is a plant that is at Clemson University. It's one of the biggest, most floriferous ones I've ever seen. This is in the Styraceae, so it's related to Styrax. The flower is quite similar to Styrax, as you can see, but much larger, very large blooms. In the Northeast, up where you guys are, where there are cooler nights, this plant actually, the flowers tend to be much more pink. But our problem is our nighttime temperatures don't change so much from our daytime temperatures. So that color is really not present in many of our spring flowering trees like this. But I've seen photographs of this in England where it's just the most beautiful powder flower. And even though you can't see it here in this photo, they do have just a little slight touch of blush at the base. But in any case, it's a really incredibly showy plant in bloom. And then the seeds of this thing are whoppers. I'll tell you, they are slightly reminiscent of Styrax, but they're interesting in that each one of these, like Davidia, which it is completely unrelated to, has multiple carpels on the inside. So if you cut this thing in half, you would see that it has 5 or 6 embryos in there. So in order to germinate this, we use a pair of pruners and almost peel the thing like an apple to kind of scarify it a bit, and then we sow them, and we'll have 4 or 5 plants that come up out of that same that we can then kind of extract. But really, really cool plant. This is Metapanax. So this again is a relative of the Aralia. So we've looked at Fatsia, we've looked at Brassioopsis, and now Metapanax, I think, is another really fantastic and underutilized broadleaf evergreen for dry shade. This plant can take bone dry conditions in the darkest of shade and still makes this really nice kind of base shape broadleaf evergreen, nice 3-leaf foliage to it. So it doesn't, like a sassafras or some of the other Panaxes, it rather than having, either the entire leaf and then the mitten and then the trilobe, this one will always have trilobe foliage, and then blooms terminally, as you can see there. This plant will get, the biggest ones I've seen are about 15 to 20 feet high and about half as wide, almost a nice, really vase shape to it. Close up of the foliage. So I'm sure you're familiar with our native wax myrtle, Myrica. This is Myrica rubra. So this is, there are many different genus in Myrica, and the genus actually has been changed to something completely different, but I'm going to use Myrica for our purposes here because I can't remember what the new genus is, and it is a mouthful. But so this is Myrica rubra, which is known as a superfood. So it has extremely high antioxidants, but you almost never see them here. It is a fantastic broadleaf evergreen that is grown and farmed in China, and it produces these large red edible fruits, almost strawberry-like, in the mid-spring, early summer, I'd say. Female plants do. Now, so these also have male and female flowers on separate plants, so you need a pollinator in order to get this kind of fruit. But more and more studies are being done with this. And in California, they're starting to produce this because I think originally it was thought to be almost a tropical plant. But our Chinese colleague at the University of Georgia has over 100 of these out in their field that have been there for 10 years. And they're starting to make selections based on the fruit. So the fruit can be almost black purple to a very light pink, almost white. So the ornamental potential is there, but also the fruit can also range from extremely tasty to like a sweet fruit to basically a diesel fuel gasoline mixture. And so, some selection has to be made on the flavors of these, but they're extremely high in antioxidants. The only problem is their shelf life is about 3 or 4 days. And so even in China, they're sold on the street corners. You don't see them in grocery stores. By the time they're packaged and put in the store shelves, they're starting to ferment. They do dry them. They make a powder out of it that can be, reconstituted for drinks or energy shakes or whatever. But it is something to look for. It's a fantastic landscape plant that produces really fantastic fruits, but some selection needs to be made, as I mentioned. But it's something to keep your eye out for, Myrica rubra. And here is a photo of the female flowers. It's quite easy to sex them after about 5 years. You can start to tell the males from females, and so you can make sure you get the right ones together. This is my colleague Tim doing what my children do when I asked them to smile for a photo, standing there kind of as a scale for these plants. These are 5-year-old Myrica rubra, so they get to about 6 feet tall in 5 years. The 10-year-old plants are about double that size, but they're full to the ground, or they can be grown very much like a wax myrtle. They can be limbed up, a multi-stem shrub. They can be gardened under. But again, I think this edible fruit is a really great attribute to them. Another plant that we'll look at that has a little bit more of a tropical tendency. This is Oxyspora. This is relative to Tibicina, as you may look at the foliage and see that it has some reminiscent qualities there, and is very much like that. The flower panicles occur in late September, early October. This is a collection we made in Vietnam. Big foliage, big, beautiful foliage that's really nicely unblemished. We actually moved this in and out of our greenhouses, so we'll plant this in Gainesville for the summer, and then we'll either propagate it from cuttings, which it roots quite easily, or move the entire plant into the greenhouse. But it gets 6 by 6 or so during one growing season. The flower panicles there can be almost 2 feet long. And you can see it in bud here, just about to open. Very showy plant, and is a woodland plant, so it really prefers just filtered sun to anything. But really nice, kind of a tropical touch to the garden. This is one that we play this game at the nursery when people come through who think they know everything. The chump, and this is one that no one ever gets right. This is a plant that was introduced to me by my Chinese colleague. We collected this in southeastern China. This is a monotypic genus, monotypic family called Pentaphylax ureoides. And honestly, in the wild, this plant is a scraggly, scrubby-looking, sort of a Charlie Brown Christmas tree growth habit to it. But we collected seed anyways, and all of them we pitched except for this one particular one that's growing in our field that actually mounds on itself. And so after almost 10 years, this plant is only 4. It just continues, I won't say weeps because it doesn't really do that. It just slowly gets larger as this ball, and the new growth is this beautiful leathery red. It blooms in the middle of the summer with panicles of flowers. This is not a great shot, but you can kind of see axillary blooms reminiscent of our native prunus, perhaps, but continually pushing red. So will this plant be the next greatest thing for the landscape? I don't know, but it is a great stump the chump plant. And I think, it has shown incredible cold hardiness, for whatever that's worth. But I do think, selection is important when you're looking at these sorts of things. And then a couple of conifers quickly. One of my favorite pines that we collected, again in Hubei, I believe, was this flat top pine called Pinus fenziliana. So this is a relative of our white pine, 5-needle pine, that has a very upright habit as a juvenile. But then once it becomes a mature adult, as you can see here in China, it gets almost a flat top to it, and the white stomatal bands become quite showy as the needles kind of make this upturned, almost frosted look to the plant. just fantastic. So we were able to collect one single seed of this in 2015. And I gave it to our greenhouse manager in Atlanta. And when we returned, and I completely forgot about it, honestly. And just a few years ago, when I was meandering through the greenhouses, pulling plants to put in our field, he handed me this 2-gallon pot of this pine that we had collected, and I was just ecstatic that we had it. It's really beautiful, and you can see kind of the up close here of the stomatal bands on these needles. So as a juvenile, as I said, it has a very nice upright tendency, fairly columnar, and then as a mature plant, it begins to get this flat top to it. We're working on propagating this. It is not the easiest thing to graft, but we do have a couple people helping us out with that. Podocarpus, perhaps nerifolius. This was a collection made in northern Vietnam. It is a little bit tender for us, but planted up against kind of a nice brick wall that produces some heat in the wintertime. The great thing about this is that the new growth is this fantastic red, which all summer long it is producing. So again, even as a container plant, that needs a little bit of protection, I think it's worth growing. The new growth on this mimics many of the tropical podocarpus. It can take no cold whatsoever. At 5 degrees, this thing did not like it, I will admit, and it lost about a foot of wood out of the top of it, but came right back and is a beautiful plant this fall. By the time it had a nice full growing season to it. 5 degrees is cold for us. We do not get that cold often, as I mentioned. And so, I don't really count that as a normal winter, but this was a really eye-catching plant. We do grow a few of this is Rhododendron fortunii, again, that we collected in China. We had about 25 seedlings that we made selections of. Some were pure white, some were dark pink, some had these pink striations in them, some were extremely fragrant, others weren't. So we kept about 12 of them and passed along the others. But just to kind of give you an idea of the size of these, we are not able to grow many of these big leaf rhododendrons in the Atlanta area. And this fortunii has done just fantastic for us. Really large, almost lily-like blooms, individual flowers. The trusses, bigger than a softball, really very showy rhododendron. So we're, again, happy to evaluate this versus some of the other big leaf rhododendrons that may grow in Georgia up in the mountains, but just do not tolerate these lower elevations like fortunii has for us. This is the Asian bladdernut. This is Staphylia polycarpa, variety rosea. It is a mouthful, but it is a beautiful plant. So typically the flowers are kind of a white panicle. These, as you can see, have a nice tinged pink to them. Blooms before the foliage comes out. The only drawback to this really is that it blooms almost the same time as the flowering cherries are blooming. So it gets a little bit lost in the shuffle with those guys, but upon closer inspection, you can really see that this is a unique plant with really nice long panicles that will then make large inflated seed pods with nuts that rattle around inside, just like our native stuff. Yeah. We grow a number of shimmas, probably 4 or 5 different species. Excuse me, at ABG. This is one that was collected by Quarry Hill Botanic Garden. I think now it's called Sonoma Botanic Garden out in California by Bill McNamara. This is Shimma sinensis, and this is by far the most ornamental of the shimmas that we grow, as well as the most cold hardy. 5 degrees did not cause any of the foliage to fall off this plant. It blooms in the middle of the summer, has these really unique ball-like blooms that come out, and then, unlike any of the other shimmas we grow, has this nice red bract that appears around the flower that stays once the bloom opens. The flower itself is quite large, a couple inches across, nicely fragrant. But a medium-sized tree of this in bloom in the middle of the summer is a real showstopper. Kind of looks Gordonia-esque, but it is in that same camellia family. So that flower looks a lot like a large Camellia sinensis, perhaps. But again, Shimma sinensis is one that it does propagate. So we are passing this plant around. This is the only clone in the United States that I know of. It was collected only one time by Quarry Hill and is the only clone being passed around. And then sorbus. We cannot grow mountain ash for anything here in the South. They hate humidity and they hate heat. The compound foliaged ones do. Now, about 5 or 6 years ago, we started evaluating some of these simple foliage sorbus, these entire leaf ones that We have 3 different species now, or three different, we believe they're different species anyways. Not sure which they are exactly, but all are simple leaved and all have been with us over 10 years. And have begun flowering and producing fruit, and 2 out of the 3 have really beautiful fall color. They're not susceptible to fire blight or any sort of phytophthora for us, and they get no foliage issues whatsoever. So we're again thrilled to be able to evaluate this. What did I call this sheet here real quick? And well, actually, we don't know what this one is. This is the fall color of that. We have it labeled as alnifolia, but I'm not at all sure that's what it is. Very upright habit to it, nice fall color. And this is a similar looking one. This is Sorbus dunii, which has beautiful white endomentum on the underside of the foliage. And this one also has done beautifully for us. We collected this in 2019, our last trip to China before COVID, and we have 8-foot tall plants of this that are doing beautifully. Styrax, this is Styrax juana. We have all but eradicated Styrax japonicus out of our gardens, mostly because of their reseeding issues. In the areas where they can be easily weeded out, we have left them in the beds. But by and large, in our open areas where the birds don't move them, but it seems like either they float or they roll downhill, but they come up quite readily. And so we really have all but eradicated our Japonicus types. But these later flowering ones, this Juanis and Obasia, for example, flower about a month later for us. Near the seed set, we get almost no seed set on Juanis, and we get a little bit of seed on Obasia, but nothing really to be worried about. But I love the clusters of blooms that occur on the ends of the branches here. You can quite fragrant, beautiful fall color, but just the masses of flowers in late June, early July kind of set this one apart. In fact, this does not even produce foliage until late May for us here in Atlanta, which is kind of weird, but it's quite cold hardy, I would imagine, because of that, and extremely floriferous. Annex formosana is another one to try. I think this is one of our Taiwanese collections, one of the evergreen Hamamelidaceae plants. Beautiful scallop foliage. This also is a big plant. So this is not Hamamelidaceae. This is another Araliaceae. So we've looked at, I guess, 4 different Araliaceaes this evening. This being probably the largest. This one ultimately will get about 30 by 30. 30 by 20, I'd say, a little bit higher than wide. Slow growing, beautiful, large felty leaves that are completely evergreen. 5 degrees did nothing to this plant, but it is kind of a slow grower, but a really unique broadleaf evergreen, I think, for shade. Close up of the foliage and the underside, this really nice brown endomentum. Very unusual foliage, not spiny at all. And then finally, I will end in a genus that I really, really like. Tilias are magnificent plants, but they're large, which is no problem, but they many times will take, half a century before they start to flower or to produce somewhat ornamental characteristics. This is Tilia endochrysea. This is an extremely rare collection from China. This is not our collection, but a plant we got from Nick Macer at Pan Global Plants in the UK. He collected this plant in Sichuan. This beautiful red felt new growth that does come out quite early for us. So the benefit of that is that we get our spring freezes after this has been flushing for a week or 2. It knocks the new growth back and it does it again. So it almost looks like the plant is blooming in the early spring just with the new growth that comes out of it. But a really wonderful species of Tilia to look for, and this is it in our field. So in the summertime the foliage gets large and leathery, and it has a really upright habit to it. Quite a fast growing tree. This is only a 3-year-old plant that is pushing 15 feet tall, but a really, really nice species to keep your eye. So with that, I will end just with one more shot of where many of these plants come from, and what is my I'm fortunate enough to have as my office for months out of the year. This is the Putalang Mountains in northern Vietnam, where we were just about 6 months ago or so. making collections. But thank you so much for having me. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to.
Scott, this is Ed. I'm curious in terms of how long it might take for any of these plants that you've shown us to get into production in horticulture.
We are working on that. We share plants with our local kind of disseminators here in the Southeast. So Tony Avent has a lot of these plants in his evaluation area there in Raleigh, and he really is probably one of the biggest proponents for getting these things out. We are happy to share material, to other gardens or nurserymen up in your area. If anyone is willing to try to propagate some of these, I'm happy to share these. I share them with the National Arboretum. We disseminate about 20 or 30 boxes of plants to gardens and nurseries around the U.S. What they do with them, I don't always know, but we are happy to share these plants to try to get them out as quickly as we can. But it's a slow go, as you well know. But they're starting to trickle out for sure.
Scott, this is so inspiring, and I really appreciate your sharing what is the latest in the woodies. This is such an important work that you do, and bringing these various cultivars to the United States and testing them. I can't wait to see what comes into general production and into the Mid-Atlantic region. So thank you so much for sharing this. Are there any other questions? Scott, you are getting great congratulations in the chat, and I will share the recording with you afterwards. But let's just give it a minute and see if anyone else wants to unmute themselves and ask you anything specific.
Sure.
I was really taken by that Tibet China relative that you showed. How hardy do you think that might be?
It comes back for us in a normal winter. That 5 degrees killed our plant outside. But how cold do you guys get in the
I just got a zone 8 rating, so
I wow, so you're fine.
To zone 8. So I would love to try that.
No, we're we're happy to share cuttings or whatever, but I don't think I've sent that one up to the National Arboretum yet. But it's a great plant and one that's very easy to propagate and grow.
Oh, great!
I'll make room in my greenhouse
I'm
for
in
it.
Maryland, so I'm still zone 7. Who else has a question?
I have a question about the Miraca rubra. What I was wondering about, since it's so fragile or it rots so quickly, I wondered if it could be flash frozen, similar to what they do with loquats and oh, why can't I think of it?
Lychee?
I mean, yes.
Yes, I think that would be a fantastic way to approach it. I think the market is still so new in the U.S. In fact, my Chinese colleague at UGA sent me an eBay link a couple of weeks ago that had a 1-year grafted plant of that for sale for $1,600. And so, it is still pretty new and in kind of this variegated monstera sort of a price range. But I think in the next 5 years, we'll start to see that plant come on the market. I'm sure they'll figure out whether or not it's flash freezing or drying or something or another. But it really, I think it's one that is worth pursuing.
Can't wait to try it.
Man, I saw that you came off mute. Do you have a question? What about Jim? Jim, you frequently have questions. Do you have anything you would like to share with the group?
I just think we need to kind of get together and have him send us a care package. Things to try in the Washington metropolitan area. You know, National Arboretum can't have all the fun.
And we have
That's
some
true.
magicians here. We have people here who are adept at rooting and growing plants, who are
Well,
semi-professional at it.
this spring we should talk. I'm be more than happy to send you a care package. You just tell me where to send it.
Scott, we need to get you up here and we need to do a little hands-on workshop with the group and bring the care package up, and you're welcome to stay with me or with one of our other members, and we should do a hands-on situation. So
I'll bake.
Lynn will prepare some of her delicious treats, perhaps that wonderful salmon that she had recently, and perhaps we'll add in a white elephant gift exchange in addition to the plants.
Oh, ha, ha.
Sounds
I really
good. I'll
want to
hold
thank
to it.
you, Scott. This has been so invigorating to hear about the work that you're doing at ABG, and I really appreciate all that you do for the plant community and your generosity in sharing both your time and the cuttings and the plants and the seeds. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you all so much for having me and taking the time to listen to me talk. I appreciate it.
It's fantastic.
So now you
much.
know that there are people out here in the general plant community who are keenly interested in what you're doing and in what our next toys are going to be.
Yes,
We've got all kinds of
absolutely.
things coming down the pipe.
I mean, we take great pride in having things full size in our garden that were bleeding edge 5 years ago, you know, or 10 years ago. I mean, I have a heptacodium that towers over my house because it's been in the ground for 40 years. And
Wow.
back before they were common, this sort of thing is what we live for.
Well, I need to come up there then, it sounds like. Absolutely.
Yeah, Scott, you would be more than welcome. Your information is falling on very fertile ears.
It sounds like it, yes. We'll have to work that out next year for sure.
If you are legally allowed to do it. Some of the people who talk to us are showing us these wonderful things and say, well, because of the nature of our charter, we cannot hand them on to the general public. Are you restricted in that way?
90% of our plants are for sharing. There are a handful of things that would be critically endangered and things that aren't really ready to go out yet. But that's a small percentage of what we deal with. Most of the plants that I showed, you know, we would be willing to share material of. Yes.
That's wonderful, because so many times, yes, we love hearing about these things, but it's sort of a look but don't touch thing.
Right.
So you've raised our hopes that we can be growing some of these things in the relatively near future.
Well, we're going to have to follow up with you after the holidays. And I really wish you a wonderful holiday. I hope you get a little break. I hope everyone on the call gets a little break. And we'll follow up and see if we can figure out something in person. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us tonight. You've been very generous.
Really.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I look forward to seeing you all again. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
Night, night.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.